Penny Wong was one of countless politicians who appeared on this program over the past 28 years. We've interviewed Prime Ministers, opposition leaders and everyone in between. Tonight we asked some of them to reflect on their Lateline experiences.
Well, it's Kevin Rudd here, reflecting on Lateline.
Well, joining us now live from our Canberra studio is the opposition Foreign Affairs spokesman, Kevin Rudd.
The best ones I remember was when Tony Jones was quizzing me on the latest evolution in Mark Latham's position on the Iraq War, where frankly between one interview and the next I wasn't quite sure what Mark Latham's position actually was.
Kevin Rudd, did Mark Latham run the troops home by Christmas line past you before he unveiled it on the Mike Carlton radio program?
We'd been discussing this for a couple of weeks, Tony.
Tony, being forever forensic, would try and pin me down. Me, being forever evasive, was trying to provide myself with as much real room as possible, not knowing where our great and glorious leader of the Labor Party would take us on the next iteration.
So you knew several weeks ago that Mark Latham planned to come out and say troops home by Christmas, did you?
I can't pinpoint any particular time as far as all that's concerned, Tony.
I enjoy the intellectual jousting. The interrogation has always been very, very diligent, very skillful, very well informed, if I may say so.
Are you worried that the government may actually be out of step with the community on this issue?
I don't think the government's out of step with the community.
Gentlemen, I'll come back to the issue of trade. No, I'm sorry, Mr Beasley, I'm sorry. I'll come back to some of these issues.
Well, the end of Lateline is a step back intellectually in Australian television, I do believe. But what it's effectively done is to remove from Australian television a long, in-depth, detailed interview between an intelligent presenter, and Lateline have had fabulous presenters, Kerry O'Brien onwards, and a politician with an argument. For some time now, for example, in Western Australia, we've been operating out of I don't know what it is, an inflatable tent or a marquee whenever we board an Ansett aircraft.
Sometimes it'd go for the political answers, sometimes it'd go to high level of philosophy or experts from around the world. But by the end of the program, you'd always learnt something you didn't know half an hour earlier.
I think I've had all the rogues. I mean, Kerry O'Brien and Tony Jones and more recently Emma Alberici. They've all probably scored their marks.
Dr Hewson is himself perceived to be cold and uncaring, a member of the New Right, nor is he seen as a person who has any possibility of leading the Liberals to victory at the next election. And it goes on.
Look, it's hard for me to believe actually that Lateline is going to end. I mean, for me it was one of those opportunities for real current affairs, for a focus on real issues, an opportunity to talk in more detail about key policy issues.
I had an interview on the mining tax a few years ago in opposition that I've replied in my mind many times over, thinking that I could have done that much better. That was a learning experience. And of course,
you're not arguing, are you, that royalties are not a tax?
Well, what I'm arguing is that as a result of the deal that Wine Swan has entered into with those three mining companies, that of course those $2 billion will come straight out of Wine Swan's budget bottom line.
I've been in a few mosh pits in my day, I have to say, yes.
I've got to say, when I started my political career, I didn't see myself singing Bohemian Rhapsody and talking politics in a car with David Lipscomb. That's a key one. I remember doing an interview with Emma Alberici. She was pretty tough. I was standing outside my electorate office in Geelong. I had a few hoons going past in the car, yelling things out. I could barely hear her. One of the toughest interviews I've done in the job.
Undermining healthcare, universal education.
In the 90s with Kerry O'Brien and later Tony Jones, it was a very strong program and one that people in government and opposition, and I of course experienced both of those in that decade, really wanted to get on. And it was a very valuable medium to get a point of view across.
All right, Mr Howard, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us tonight on Lateline.
Thank you.
Well, that was the Prime Minister in his first interview with us earlier this evening. Following that interview and after Vice Admiral Shackleton, the Chief of the Navy, put out a statement attempting to clarify his earlier remarks, Mr Howard requested a second interview with Lateline on the issue. Here's that second interview. Well, Prime Minister, welcome back.
Thank you.
Who was it that convinced Admiral Shackleton to make this new statement?
I think that's a bit offensive. to him?
I think my favourite Lateline interview was with Emma Alberici, and it was myself and Malcolm Turnbull. Myself as the new Communications Minister, debating the Shadow Communications Minister about the National Broadband Network. And it was a bit of an insight into Malcolm Turnbull's Prime Ministership.
See, Andy doesn't understand how this thing is priced. Let me explain.
No one's as smart as you, Malcolm.
That is certainly not true.
You'd start the day always having to listen to AM and finish it watching Lateline.
The key memory of Lateline, of course, is that you can have one part of your day where you listen to the raving lefties and by gosh, you got them, and another time where you listen to the raving righties and they probably work for other networks or on radio. And then, of course, you got a more sombre, balanced approach, which was Lateline. I really appreciated that.
You certainly seem to have acquired Tony Abbott's trust and admiration. But what's the story about you waking him up very late at night in a hotel when he was scantily clad?
Oh, I'm just that kind of guy, Tony. Well, look, I just happened to be proximate to where he sleeps, and I just knocked on the door to wish him the best of luck, and he came out in his grundies.
He was wearing trunks then, was he?
No, he was wearing a very becoming black pair of underpants. Tony, do you want me to tell you more?
I like the way you talk. I like the way you walk. I like the way you talk. Susie Q. All right.
I don't think that singing Susie Q did anything for my career, even though I was born in Tamworth, and it certainly showed that I was well suited to the Olympics of ugly people, which is politics.
Look, there's so many times that I've been absolutely terrified facing a very difficult interview across this very desk. But I've got to say, however hard it was for me to do a long-form interview with some of the best journalists in the country, I think it's been very good for democracy to have that grilling available.
I had to be very, very clear on what I wanted to say in very short sentences, otherwise Tony would be all over you. I remember a couple of times when he nearly got me, I had to say he was the world's greatest journalist just to divert him.
You can't name any of them at the moment, apart from yourself?
Well, we don't want to give you all the headlines in one night, Tony. We want to come back a little bit, even though you're the best journalist in Australia. We want to
thank
come
you
back
very much for
slowly.
that. But let's actually ask a few questions.
And of course, there's the great relationship between Tony Jones and Clive Palmer. They had a bromance going for quite a few months there. I think it ended when Emma Alberici called out Clive Palmer and he ripped his headpiece out and stormed out. That was certainly one of the moments that I'll remember.
I wanted to ask you, if you're a public figure, Mr Palmer, the audience has a right to know what's happening in legal cases against you.
Goodbye, Lateline. Lateline. Goodbye. Goodbye, Lateline. Goodbye. 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 But come again. Goodbye.